They thought the hallway swallowed their voices. They forgot what I did for a living. For 34 years, I sat in courtrooms, a silent witness to testimony, my fingers flying across a stenotype machine, capturing every word, every hesitation, every lie whispered under a breath held too long. I transcribed the human heart in all its messy, desperate truth. A hallway with its smooth, sound-reflecting walls was no match for an ear trained in the acoustics of deception. I was in my favorite armchair, the one Otis bought for me the year he retired, its worn velvet conforming to the shape of my body like a second skin. A soft afghan was draped over my lap, and my eyes were closed. To my daughter-in-law, Brianna, I was asleep. An old woman dozing away the afternoon, lost in the fuzzy, slow-moving world she had so carefully constructed for me. The television murmured a game show in the living room, a sound so familiar it was like silence. The twins, my beautiful grandchildren, were blessedly quiet, likely upstairs with their tablets. Brianna was on the phone in the hall, just outside the archway of the sitting room. Her voice was pitched low, confidential. It was a tone I had come to associate with discussions about my well-being, conversations that were always framed in care but left a residue of something else, something cold and clinical. "I'm telling you, Sharon, it's getting worse," Brianna whispered. A pause. Her sister, I presumed. "No, she just drifts. Half the time I don't think she knows what day it is. It's for the best. Dr. Miller agrees." Another, longer pause. I kept my breathing even and slow, a shallow rhythm of sleep. My heart, however, had begun a low, heavy drumming against my ribs. "Honestly," Brianna said, her voice dropping even further, a conspiratorial sigh, "she won't last the year. Once the POA goes through, the house is ours." The words didn't crash over me. They entered me quietly, like poison seeping into soil. She won't last the year. A clinical assessment, a business projection, and then the true heart of it. The house is ours. My house. The one Otis and I had filled with 30 years of Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, and the quiet comfort of a shared life. The foundation of our legacy. I didn't move. I didn't open my eyes. My training, all those years of impassive listening, took over. My body remained a perfect portrait of slumber, but behind my closed eyelids, my mind was coming alive. The fog, a gentle, persistent haze that had clouded my thoughts for months, began to thin at the edges. It was a fog I had accepted as a symptom of age, of grief, of a mind winding down. I had allowed Brianna to name it, to define it, to manage it. Grief makes people very easy to persuade, and my grief for Otis, even 2 years on, was a vast and quiet country. Brianna ended her call. Her footsteps, soft in her house slippers, padded down the hall and into the kitchen. The refrigerator door hummed open, then clicked shut. The gentle clink of a glass being set on the counter. Normal sounds. The sounds of a life I thought we were building together. In that moment, with the echo of her words still hanging in the air of my mind, I understood that the life I was living was not the one I thought it was. A new kind of transcription had begun, not of words spoken in a courtroom, but of actions taken in the quiet, trusted spaces of my own home. And I would miss nothing. That evening, the house was full of the familiar symphony of family. Damon, my son, came home from his job at the city planning department, smelling of tired ambition and the faint scent of paper. He kissed my cheek, his touch gentle, his eyes clouded with a weary concern that I now saw was not just for me, but manufactured by his wife. The twins, Micah and Maya, chattered about their day at school, their bright 7-year-old energy, a balm and a burden. Brianna moved around the kitchen with an efficiency I had once admired, preparing a meal of baked tilapia and roasted asparagus. It was healthy. Everything she made for me was healthy. "How are you feeling, Mama?" Damon asked, settling onto the ottoman in front of my chair. I opened my eyes and offered him a small smile. "I'm fine, baby. A little tired today." "Bree said you had a long nap." "I did," I said. "The truth, but not the whole truth." Brianna came in, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She had a bright, professional smile, the kind she must have perfected during her time as a pharmacy technician. It was a smile that conveyed competence and care without touching her eyes. "Time for your evening pills, Vernita," she said, her voice full of practiced sweetness. She held a small paper cup with 2 pills and a glass of water. For months, this had been our ritual. After Otis passed, and Damon and his family moved in to help me out, Brianna had taken over my medications. My blood pressure, a small pill for cholesterol. It had seemed like such a kindness. My hands sometimes trembled, and the bottles could be difficult. She had organized them all into a weekly pill minder, a rainbow of plastic boxes that marked the slow, orderly passage of my days. I took the cup from her hand. Usually I would swallow them without a thought. Tonight I paused. I looked at the 2 small tablets resting in the pleated paper. One was my familiar white oval cholesterol pill. The other, the one for my blood pressure, was a small pale blue circle. I looked at it, really looked at it, for the first time in a long time. "Something wrong, Mama?" Damon asked, his brow furrowed. "No," I said, my voice quiet. "Just admiring the color. It's a pretty blue." Brianna laughed, a light, airy sound. "Well, don't admire it too long. Bottoms up." I tipped the pills into my mouth and took a sip of water, but as I swallowed, I used my tongue to tuck the small blue pill into the side of my cheek. It was an old trick, one I'd seen witnesses describe defendants doing on the stand. I swallowed the water, smiled my thanks, and handed the empty cup and glass back to her. The pill in my cheek was a small, bitter secret. Later that night, when the house was finally quiet and the slow, rhythmic breathing of sleep drifted from the other bedrooms, I retrieved the pill. I wrapped it carefully in a tissue and tucked it into the small jewelry box on my dresser, where I kept Otis's wedding band. It felt like evidence. A small, blue piece of a puzzle I was just beginning to see. The fog in my mind was still present, a soft weight that made thinking feel like walking through water, but the whisper from the hallway was a lighthouse, cutting through the haze with a sharp, repeating beam. She won't last the year. The next morning, I waited until Brianna had taken the twins to school and left for her part-time job at the pharmacy. The house was mine again for a few precious hours. The silence was vast, a welcome relief. I moved with a purpose that felt foreign and familiar at the same time. I went to the linen closet where Brianna kept the spare bottles of my prescriptions. I found the bottle for my lisinopril, the blood pressure medication. The label was correct. My name, my doctor's name, the dosage. I shook out one of the pills. It was a small white hexagonal tablet, not a pale blue circle. My breath caught in my chest. I stood there in the quiet hallway, holding the 2 pills in the palm of my hand, the white one from the bottle and the blue one from my jewelry box. They were proof. A substitution had been made. My court reporter's mind, the part of me that lived for detail and discrepancy, took over. The blue pill had a tiny imprint on it, an A on one side and the number 245 on the other. I wrote it down on a slip of paper from the notepad I kept by the phone. The fog was not age, it was not grief, it was this little blue pill I had been taking every night. I felt a cold anger begin to spread through me, slow and deep. It wasn't a hot, flashing anger, but a heavy, clarifying one. It burned away the last remnants of the haze. Apparently, ambition works both ways. My chance came 2 days later. One of the ladies from my Thursday Dominoes group, Florence, called to say she was under the weather and couldn't make it to our weekly game at the community center. Brianna, who usually drove me, was relieved. "Oh, that's a shame," she said, her sympathy a little too quick. "Well, you can rest up today, Vernita. I'll make you a nice cup of chamomile tea." "Actually," I said, keeping my voice mild, "I was thinking I'd take a little walk over to the pharmacy. I need to pick up some of that special lotion for my hands. The dry air in the house is terrible." Brianna's smile tightened just a fraction at the corners. "I can get it for you this afternoon when I go to work." No, I insisted gently. "The walk will do me good. It's a beautiful day. I won't be long." She couldn't argue without seeming unreasonable. A walk to the corner pharmacy was hardly a strenuous undertaking. She watched me from the doorway as I put on my coat and sensible walking shoes, her face a mask of placid concern. The weight of her gaze felt like a physical restraint, but I walked out the door and down the porch steps, my back straight, my pace steady. The air outside was crisp, the October sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The short walk to Yusuf's pharmacy felt like a pilgrimage. Each step was a reclamation of my own autonomy. Mr. Yusuf had been our family's pharmacist for 20 years. He'd filled prescriptions for Otis's heart condition, for Damon's childhood asthma, for the twins' ear infections. He was a kind, meticulous man with warm eyes and a memory like a steel trap. The little bell over the door chimed as I entered. Mr. Yusuf was behind the counter, counting pills onto a small tray. He looked up and his face broke into a genuine smile. "Mrs. Holloway. Vernita, what a nice surprise. We don't see you in here much anymore." "Brianna is very efficient at picking things up for me," I said, walking to the counter. "It's a blessing, mostly." He chuckled. "I'm sure it is. What can I get for you today? More of that hand lotion?" "That, yes. But I also had a question for you, Tariq, if you have a moment." "For you, always," he said, putting his tray aside. I opened my purse and took out the small slip of paper where I'd written down the pill's imprint. I slid it across the counter to him. "I wonder if you could tell me what this is," I said. "I found a stray pill in the bottom of my purse, and I can't for the life of me remember what it's for." It was a weak lie, but the best I could manage. He picked up the paper and studied it. "A 245, let me see." He turned to his computer, his fingers tapping quickly on the keyboard. A moment later, he nodded. "Here we are, that's alprazolam, a generic for Xanax." Xanax, a sedative. Used to treat anxiety and panic disorders. My heart felt like a cold stone in my chest. "It's a fairly strong dose," he continued, turning back to me. "For short-term use, usually. Is this something Dr. Miller prescribed for you?" I had to be careful. "I don't recall," I said, feigning the very confusion that the pill itself had been causing. "My memory isn't what it used to be, you know." Mr. Yusuf's expression softened with sympathy. "Of course. Let me just look at your file. It will only take a second." I waited, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. The air in the pharmacy was thick with the clean, medicinal smell of rubbing alcohol and the faint, sweet scent of cough drops. I could hear the hum of the beverage cooler and the soft rock station playing on a small radio behind the counter. Every detail felt sharp, hyper-real. "Ah, yes," he said, his eyes on the screen. "Here it is. It was called in last month by Dr. Miller's office. Your daughter-in-law picked it up on the 10th. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "She said you were having trouble sleeping, a lot of anxiety since Otis passed. This prescription was authorized along with the refill for your lisinopril." "She called it in?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Well, the doctor's office called it in, but Brianna arranged it. Said she was managing your care now to make things easier on you." He smiled. "She seems like a very devoted daughter." My throat was dry. "She is. Very devoted." I took a slow breath. "Tariq, would it be too much trouble to ask you for a printout of my prescription history for the last 6 months? I'm trying to get my records in order for a new insurance review." Another lie. They were coming more easily now. "No trouble at all, Vernita," he said kindly. He turned back to his printer. A few moments later, he handed me 2 sheets of paper, neatly stapled together. "Here you go. Let me know if you need anything else." I folded the papers and put them in my purse, my hand trembling slightly. I paid for my lotion, thanked him, and walked out of the pharmacy into the bright, indifferent sunshine. The world looked exactly the same, but the ground beneath my feet had shifted. I had the proof. A sedative, not a blood pressure pill. A prescription I never authorized. A lie told to a kind man who trusted my family. The walk home felt much longer. The weight of the papers in my purse was immense. When I arrived, Brianna was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio as she sliced vegetables for a salad. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so peaceful, it felt like a violation. "Did you have a nice walk?" she asked, not looking up from her work. "It was invigorating," I said, and went to my room. I sat in my armchair, the one where I had overheard her words, and I spread the pharmacist's printout on the small table beside me. The black and white lines of text were stark and unforgiving. Lisinopril, atorvastatin, and there it was, a new edition 6 weeks ago. Alprazolam, 1 milligram, refill authorized. My signature was not required. That night, Brianna presented me with my evening pills. I looked at the small blue circle and felt a wave of nausea. I palmed it again, the familiar bitterness on my tongue, a reminder of the larger bitterness filling my heart. I knew I couldn't keep doing this. I needed a plan. More than that, I needed an ally. The next day, I made another phone call. This time, not to a friend, but to a name Brianna had never heard me speak. Marvella Ford, Otis's attorney. She had handled his business affairs for 40 years and had drafted his will. She was sharp, discreet, and possessed a spine of pure steel. I had not spoken to her since the funeral, but Otis had always said, "If you're ever in a corner, you call Marvella. She'll get you out." I was in a corner. Her secretary put me through immediately. Marvella's voice was exactly as I remembered it, low, calm, and carrying an unshakable authority. "Vernita," she said, her tone warm but direct, "it's good to hear your voice. I was sorry we didn't get to speak more at the service. How have you been holding up?" "Marvella, I need your help," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I was in my bedroom with the door closed, but I still felt the need for absolute secrecy. "Of course," she said, her tone shifting instantly from social to professional. "What's going on?" I didn't summarize. I didn't say, "I think my daughter-in-law is trying to harm me." That would have sounded hysterical, the ramblings of a confused old woman. Instead, I laid out the facts just as I would have transcribed them in a courtroom. I told her about the whisper in the hallway, the different pill, the conversation with Mr. Yusuf, the prescription printout. I spoke in a low, even monotone, presenting the evidence piece by piece. There was a long silence on the other end of the line when I finished. I could hear the faint sound of a clock ticking in her office. "Vernita," she finally said, and her voice was grim, "you did the right thing by calling me. Do not, under any circumstances, take any more of those blue pills. Can you do that for me?" "I've been hiding them," I confessed. "Good. That's very good. You always were smarter than anyone gave you credit for." She paused. "Now tell me, has she mentioned anything about your finances? Any documents she's asked you to sign?" The breath I was holding came out in a shaky sigh. "She has some papers, a power of attorney. She says it's to make it easier for her to pay my bills, to manage things so I don't have to worry." "And have you signed them?" Marvella's voice was sharp. "Not yet. I told her I needed to think on it." "Thank God for that," she breathed. "Okay, Vernita, here's what we're going to do. I need to see you, but we can't have you coming to my office. Does Brianna leave the house at a predictable time each day?" "She takes the twins to school at 8 and then goes to work until 2 on weekdays," I told her. "Perfect. I'm going to come to you tomorrow morning at 10. I'll tell her I'm an old friend from the church auxiliary if she happens to be there. We'll say we're discussing the fall bake sale. Can you manage that?" "Yes," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. "I can manage that." "Good. And Vernita? Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Just keep being the quiet, tired woman she thinks you are. We're going to handle this." After I hung up the phone, I felt the first glimmer of hope I had felt in weeks. I was no longer alone in my quiet, well-appointed prison. The ground was still unsteady, but now I had someone holding my hand. The next morning, I was a bundle of nerves. I sat in the living room pretending to read a magazine, my ears straining for the sound of a car. Brianna had been particularly attentive that morning, fluffing my pillows, offering me tea, asking about my health. Her solicitude felt suffocating, menacing. Every kind word was a lie. Every gentle touch felt like a threat. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Brianna, who had been puttering in the kitchen, went to answer it. I heard Marvella's calm, pleasant voice. "Good morning," she said. I'm Marvella Ford, a friend of Vernita's from St. James. I was just in the neighborhood and wanted to drop off some flyers for the bake sale." "Oh, of course," Brianna said, her voice recovering quickly from the surprise. "Please come in. Mama V is in the sitting room." Marvella walked in, looking every inch the part of a distinguished church lady. She wore a tasteful navy blue suit and carried a large leather tote bag. She smiled warmly at me. "Vernita, my dear, you look well," she said, leaning down to give my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Marvella, what a lovely surprise," I said, playing my part. "I won't stay long," Marvella said to Brianna. "We just need to go over a few things for the planning committee." Brianna hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave us alone. "Can I get you some coffee, Miss Ford?" "That's very kind, but no thank you," Marvella said smoothly. "We'll just be a few minutes." She turned her full attention to me, effectively dismissing Brianna, who had no choice but to retreat back to the kitchen, leaving the sitting room door slightly ajar. Marvella didn't miss it. She sat down in the chair opposite me and opened her tote bag, pulling out a sheaf of papers that did, in fact, look like church flyers. She spoke in a normal conversational tone about fictional committee members and the price of sweet potato pies, all while her eyes communicated something else entirely. Then she leaned forward, placing a thick manila envelope on the table between us. "Now, about the table arrangements," she said, her voice still carrying. "I think we should put the cakes nearest the entrance." She tapped the envelope. "Otis was a very smart man, Vernita, a very careful man." Under the cover of the bake sale flyers, she slid the contents of the envelope out. It was a legal document several pages long, bound in a pale blue cover. The top page read, "Irrevocable Life Estate Deed." "He set this up 12 years before you and Damon were even married," Marvella murmured, her voice now a low whisper that wouldn't carry to the kitchen. "He put this house into a life estate for you. That means, for as long as you are living, this house belongs to you and only you. It cannot be sold. It cannot be used as collateral for a loan. It cannot be transferred. No power of attorney, no will, no subsequent marriage can touch it." I stared at the document, the dense legal text swimming before my eyes. I had known Otis was a good provider, a man who planned for the future, but I had never known the extent of his foresight. "Upon your passing," Marvella continued, her finger tracing a line of text, "the house does not go into your estate to be probated. It transfers automatically to a successor trustee. Otis named your brother Linwood." "Linwood?" "My steady, reliable younger brother in Atlanta." "The trustee's only job," she explained, "is to manage the property for the benefit of your heirs. In this case, Damon and his children. Linwood can decide to sell it and distribute the funds, or allow Damon's family to live here, but he makes that decision. Not Damon, not his wife." And suddenly, I understood everything. Brianna's ambition was not just about getting her hands on my savings or my monthly pension. The grand prize had always been the house. This beautiful, sprawling Hyde Park home with its original hardwood floors and stained glass windows, worth a small fortune in the current market. She thought that with a power of attorney and my eventual passing, it would be hers to flip, to sell, to leverage for the life she so desperately wanted. But she was chasing a ghost. The house was never on the table. Otis had protected me. Even from beyond the grave, he was still taking care of me. Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I would not let them fall. "So the POA," I started. "The POA would give her control over your bank accounts, your investments, anything liquid," Marvella confirmed. "She could drain you dry, but she could never touch this house. Her entire plan is built on a false premise." Marvella looked toward the kitchen. "She seems to be operating on a timeline. You mentioned she said something about a year?" "She won't last the year," I repeated the terrible phrase. Marvella's expression was grim. "That's concerning. The sedative is a serious problem, Vernita. This is elder abuse. It is a crime." "I don't want to call the police," I said immediately. "Not on my son's wife. the mother of my grandchildren. Marvella nodded slowly, her eyes full of understanding. I thought you might say that. It's your call, but we must act. The probate court filing window for any new documents is closing. We have 9 days to make sure our position is secure. She slid the original deed back into its envelope and handed it to me. Keep this somewhere safe, somewhere she would never think to look, and we need to talk to Damon. Does he know anything about this? I don't think so, I said, my heart aching for my son. He's a good man, Marvella. He loves her. He believes he's protecting me. Then he needs to see the truth, she said firmly. We will show it to him, but we will do it on your terms, in your time. She stood up, her voice returning to its bake sale brightness. Well, that's settled then. I'll let Betty know you'll handle the pecan tassies. You always make the best. She walked toward the doorway, calling out a cheerful goodbye to Brianna. I sat there, clutching the envelope that contained my salvation. The fog in my head was completely gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The path ahead was going to be painful. It would likely break my family apart, but it was the only way to save it and to save myself. For the next few days, I lived a double life. On the surface, I was the same quiet, slightly confused woman I had been for months. I allowed Brianna to fuss over me, to bring me my meals and my doctored pills, which I continued to hide. But inside, I was a different person. I was a court reporter again, gathering my evidence, preparing my testimony. I hid the life estate deed in a box of old photo albums in the attic, tucked between pictures of a young Otis in his army uniform and a baby Damon taking his first steps. Brianna grew more insistent about the power of attorney papers. She would leave them on the table beside my chair with a pen, mentioning them casually. "Just whenever you feel up to it, Vernita," she'd say, her voice smooth as silk. It would really take a load off my mind. I knew time was running out. Marvella and I had spoken on the phone twice, finalizing our plan. It had to be Sunday. Sunday was always family dinner, a tradition I had insisted on keeping after Otis passed. It was the only time Damon was truly relaxed, his guard down. It had to be then. That Sunday arrived with a heavy, overcast sky that matched the weight in my chest. The smell of the smothered chicken I had taught Brianna how to make filled the house. It was Otis's favorite meal. The irony was not lost on me. The twins were blessedly absent, sent for a sleepover at Brianna's sister's house. It was just the 3 of us. We ate in near silence. Damon tried to make small talk about a new zoning proposal downtown, but the conversation faltered. The tension was a 4th person at the table. Brianna was watching me, her eyes bright and expectant. She believed today was the day she would win. After the plates were cleared, she did not wait. She went to the sideboard and retrieved the stack of papers and a sleek, silver pen. She placed them on the polished wood of the dining room table in front of me. "Mama," she said, her voice soft and full of a terrible, false compassion. "I think it's time we settled this. Damon and I are just so worried about you. You're not thinking clearly these days, and we want to make sure you're taken care of." Damon, sitting beside me, reached over and placed his hand on my arm. "It's for the best, Mom. It just simplifies things." I looked at my son, at his earnest, worried face, and my heart broke for the deception he had been living under. He was a pawn in his wife's game, and he had no idea. I did not look at the papers she had pushed in front of me. Instead, I took a slow, deep breath. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times in my mind. I reached for my handbag, which I had placed on the chair beside me. My hand did not tremble. From it, I withdrew a folded set of papers. It was the prescription history from Mr. Yusuf. I unfolded it and slid it across the table until it rested beside the POA documents. "What's this?" Brianna asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Damon picked it up. I watched his eyes scan the page. I knew the moment he saw it. His brow furrowed in confusion. "Alprazolam? Mom, why are you taking Xanax?" "Ask your wife," I said quietly. Brianna let out a small, nervous laugh. Vernita, what are you talking about? Dr. Miller prescribed that for your anxiety. You were having trouble sleeping. We discussed this. No, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a judge's ruling. We never discussed it. You discussed it with Dr. Miller's office. You told them I was having anxiety. You filled the prescription, and you have been giving it to me every night instead of my blood pressure medication. Damon looked from the paper to his wife, his face a canvas of disbelief. Bree, what is she talking about? She's confused, honey, Brianna said, reaching for his hand. Her memory, you know how it is. She gets things mixed up. My memory is fine, I said. For 34 years, I made a living remembering things. Every word, every detail. It's a skill that doesn't just go away. Before Brianna could formulate another denial, I reached into my handbag again. This time, I pulled out the large manila envelope Marvella had given me. The crinkle of the paper was loud in the silent room. I slid it across the table. It came to a stop next to the pharmacy printout. This, I said, my voice resonating with an authority I hadn't used in years, is the irrevocable life estate deed to this house, executed by my late husband 12 years before you were ever part of this family. Damon picked it up. Brianna stared at it, her mask of concern finally beginning to crack. A flicker of pure, unadulterated panic flashed in her eyes. Damon began to read, his lips moving silently. I saw him scan the key phrases Marvella had pointed out to me. Sole and exclusive use, for the duration of her natural life, cannot be encumbered or conveyed. Successor trustee, Linwood Holloway. Brianna's hand, which had been resting on the table, stopped moving. It was a small thing, but I noticed it. Complete stillness. The composure she had worn like a suit of armor had dissolved, leaving behind a woman I barely recognized. Damon put the deed down on the table, his face pale. He looked at his wife, and for the first time, he saw her. He saw the ambition. He saw the deception. The love in his eyes was replaced by a slow, dawning horror. The house, he whispered. It was never part of her estate. It could never be ours. He looked at the pharmacy printout, then at the deed, then at the power of attorney papers his wife was so eager for me to sign, and he connected the pieces. The sedative to make me confused and compliant, the POA to gain control of my money, all of it a grand, desperate play for a prize that was never in reach. Brianna, he said, his voice cracking, tell me she's wrong. Brianna opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw not hatred, but the hollow look of defeat. She had been outmaneuvered. Her careful planning, her whispers in the hall, her manipulation of doctors and pharmacists, it had all amounted to nothing. She had underestimated the quiet old woman in the armchair. She had forgotten what I did for a living. The silence that followed was the heaviest I have ever known. It was the sound of a family breaking. Damon stood up from the table, his chair scraping harshly against the wood floor. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He just looked at his wife with an unbearable sadness. "Pack your things," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "And the kids. We're going to your sister's." And that was it. There was no screaming match, no dramatic confession, just a quiet, devastating end. The days that followed were a blur of quiet activity. Marvella handled everything. The power of attorney was, of course, never signed. She filed a formal complaint with the medical board against Dr. Miller for authorizing a controlled substance without ever speaking to the patient. She had a quiet word with Mr. Yusuf, who was mortified that he had been an unwitting participant. She filed a fresh copy of the life estate deed at the county courthouse, a public and permanent record of Otis's final act of protection. Damon and Brianna moved out. The process was swift and silent. I stayed in my room while they packed, unable to watch the life being drained from my home. The sounds of boxes being taped shut and furniture being moved were muffled and distant. The last sound I heard was the front door closing, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden, vast emptiness. The house became quiet. Too quiet. The boisterous energy of the twins was gone. The smell of Brianna's cooking was gone. The sound of Damon's key in the lock at the end of the day was gone. In winning back my home, I had lost my family. The victory felt hollow. The peace I had fought for tinged with a profound loneliness. My blood pressure medication was corrected. Within a week, the last of the chemical fog lifted from my mind. My thoughts were sharp again, my focus clear, but my heart was heavy. Damon started visiting a month later, alone. He would come on Sunday afternoons, and we would sit in the living room, the space between us filled with unspoken words. He was ashamed. He was heartbroken. He told me that Brianna had confessed everything, driven by a mountain of debt from 3 failed real estate flips I never knew about. She had seen me and my home as her last, best chance to get ahead, a means to an end. "I should have seen it, Mom," he said one afternoon, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I should have known something was wrong, but I wanted to believe I was helping you." "You love her," I said. It was not an excuse, but it was a reason. "And you love your children." Our conversations are still strained, but we are rebuilding, piece by painstaking piece. He brings the twins to see me sometimes, for short, supervised visits. They are confused by the new arrangement, but children are resilient. They climb into my lap and ask for stories about their grandpa, Otis. And for a little while, the house feels like a home again. I don't know if Damon and Brianna will stay together. That is their story to write. I host my Thursday dominoes game here at the house now. The sound of my friends' laughter and the sharp, satisfying click of the tiles on my dining room table is a kind of music. Florence and the ladies fill the silence, their easy companionship a welcome warmth. They know something happened, of course, but they are discreet enough not to ask. I am in control of my own life again. I manage my own finances, my own medications, my own home. The peace is real, but it was purchased at a great cost. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I sit in my armchair, and I can almost hear the echo of my grandchildren's laughter in the hall. It is a ghost that I am learning to live with. The world sees an old woman, living alone in a big house. But I know the truth. I am a survivor. I am the guardian of a legacy. My mind is my own. My home is my own. And my future, whatever is left of it, will be written on my own terms. A transcriber's ear, I have learned, outlasts a whisperer's confidence. And some foundations, the ones built with love and foresight, are strong enough to withstand even the most intimate betrayals.